We're making another oral history broadcast, and we're visiting today in the home of Mrs. Gracie Van Vactor in Bryansburg, Kentucky. Ms. Van Vactor, first of all, thank you for letting me come. And we'll start off, I guess, with that traditional question, where were you born?
I'm so glad you're here. I welcome you very much. And I was born in Union County, Kentucky in October of 1902.
But now you've lived in Marshall County just about all your life, haven't you?
Just about all of my life. I was raised, my family coming to Marshall County with in a covered wagon, and we landed at Altona, Kentucky. And my father farmed at Altona for a couple of years, and then he bought a farm. No, he moved to a farm on just off of the Haddocks Ferry Road, and we lived there 2 or 3 years. And then he bought the farm adjoining this farm, and we lived there for quite a few years until 1914.
So as far as you're concerned, you don't really remember anything except Marshall County, do you?
No, sir. No, sir.
But tell us a little more about that trip. Did you ever hear your folks talk about from Union County was a good long ways then, wasn't it?
I was thinking last night that I wished I'd asked them how long it took them. And I understand now, traveling with horses, and they had a wagon and 2 horses to the wagon, and they led 1 horse and 1 cow behind the wagon.
Now, they couldn't have made that trip in any one day, of course.
Oh, no. Surely it must have took them at least a week, maybe more.
There weren't too many hotels along the road. I wonder how they spent the night.
In the wagon. They slept in the wagon.
Mm-hmm.
And they cooked. They had the food in the wagon, and they cooked their meals and carried a feed for the stock and fed the stock as long as they camped at night. They camped every night.
Well, I guess farmers along the way were used to things like that, and they'd let you stop and nearby and perhaps give you fresh water.
They probably did. They told me about one place where they stayed all night one night. They said that my mother and me was in the wagon, and my daddy went up to ask permission to park our wagon and feed our stock and make our supper. And when he asked the woman if he could, the woman came to the door, and he asked the lady about staying on their premises. There's, I believe, close to an orchard. And the lady said, yes, and I don't want you staying in that wagon tonight either. You come up here to the house and stay all night and sleep in a bed. And my daddy said, well, no, I don't think we'll want to do that. So he went back to the wagon, and the lady followed him. So when she got to the wagon, she spoke to my mother and told her that she wanted her to them to come up there and stay all night. So my mother said, no, we didn't want to bother you. We just wanted permission to park and to stay here all night. And so she picked me up and took me to her house, the lady did.
Well.
So my mother, when she looked at my daddy, and so she said, well, the child's already gone, said we might as well go on up there. So they stayed that night in the house.
Well, wasn't that a hospitable thing to do?
Yes, it was. But you see, people back them days, they was friendly. There was no troubles. Nobody harmed anyone. And it must have been a pleasant trip because they were thrilled to death with it.
Mm-hmm. Now, what was your father's name?
John Fowler. And my mother's name was Maggie Fowler.
Maggie Fowler. You remember what she was before she married?
She was Maggie Davis. Her maiden name was Maggie Davis.
Very famous name in American history. Jefferson Davis.
Yes, sir. And my grandfather Davis worked at the in the early 1900s over here at Teresa's Lumber Company.
Mm-hmm.
And
very good.
He was a carpenter.
Since you, let's see, you moved what, about 1904 along in there somewhere. Now, you would have gone to school here in the county at a very early day. What school would
Yes.
that have been?
Well, that's one of the things I want to tell you about. I went to the Corsi Schoolhouse. I believe the really name of it was Canada Schoolhouse, but anyway, we always called it Corsi Schoolhouse. And there was a family that lived real close by. Her name was Montgomery. And they had a daughter named Elva Montgomery. So they had what they call the little spring schools in Marshall County, and so Miss Elva Montgomery was going to hold a little spring school, and she gathered up all the little children that was of school age, and she kept us probably a couple of months in the spring. I don't recall how long, but that was my first school.
I've never heard a story like that before. Now, when I was in school, we had one-room country schools in the county, but they started July the 1st and ran till Christmas.
I was thinking last night that I know the times, the length of the schools was quite different than they are now.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't recall exactly what months it was, but this was called a little spring school.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably a couple of months in the spring of the year because farmers then needed to get out and go doing their farm work, and generally the children that was in school while they helped out on the farm.
Did your dad farm?
Yes, my daddy was a farmer.
And he grew the usual crops, I guess.
Corn, tobacco, wheat, and those kind of things.
Did you ever have to worm any tobacco?
Oh, yes. We didn't know anything about Paris green or anything like that whenever we first began to work in the fields. We had to catch them worms and pull them in two
Yeah.
and throw them down.
And some of those big old hornworms, they'd cluck at
They
you
were
with-
tough. They
Yeah.
were tough. Them little ones was tender. You could jerk them in two, but them old big ones, you had to really
Yeah.
get after them.
And the suckering, well, that
Yeah, that was hard on you, too.
you got a kind of a gum all over your arms, clothes.
Yes, sir. You sure did. It wasn't so hard. It sounds hard, but it wasn't. My mother and father, and I had a sister named I'm the oldest child of the family, and I had a sister named Ilona.
Were there any other children?
Oh,
Was
yes, my mother, we had 12 children.
12?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, the big families in
Big
those
families,
days.
yes, there's big families, and that was so enjoyable. We all just had a good time. We'd get out in the fields and go to work, and my daddy generally did took the running around, and my mother and my sister Ilona, we worked in the field, and my mother was very jolly. So us children would get out in the field. We'd go through the field, one run through the field, and my mother said, "Now then, as children, let's sit down and rest." Well, my sister Ilona, she was quite devilish. And she knew I was afraid of a snake shed, so she'd grab an old snake shed and run me all over the field with it. My mother, she'd just sit there and laugh until she'd say, "Well, the children, it's time, let's get on and do our other work now." So we'd go on back and do our another work.
Mhm.
But we had a good time. It was
Well,
it was hard work, but it was fun. I've enjoyed life. I'm a happy person.
well, that is wonderful. Now, you finished up school at that same place? did
No, here's the way that worked out. Then the real school started after this little spring school started. And my first teacher was a man named Johnson. And I can't recall his first name, but the next teacher there was C.U. Jett,
Mm-hmm.
Lipton Jett.
Mhm.
And then, let's see, I forgot the next one's name. Oh, Miss Dora Smith, Sam Smith, and Sam Smith's wife, and Drafton Smith's mother. Do you know Drafton Smith down at
yes.
Calvert?
Matter of fact, it hasn't been very long ago since I interviewed Drafton Smith.
Drafton Smith is a fine man. And Miss Dora, that was her name, Miss Dora, she rode, Mr. Smith would bring her, he must have been cutting logs for some reason. And he would bring Miss Dora to school, that is at the Corsi school. He would bring Miss Dora on the log wagon. And then when he'd come after in the car, but he would bring her that morning on the log wagon. She'd be
And he
sitting
just
up on it.
worked during the day.
And he
yeah.
worked in the day, and then took her. I got the car at home, and we brought her home. And so then, oh, she was a darling. I had such good school teachers all my life. I just loved them, every one. And she was yes, you're speaking about the one-room schoolhouses. We had an advantage over the children today that I wish that they could have. When we were in the first grade, for instance, we studied our lessons, and then we recited the first grade. Well, we'd then be in our seats, and then that second grade would be called up. Well, we listened to what the second grade was doing too. The first grade was did. Well, we learned some things so that the second grade, when we hit there, we already had some knowledge of it, and on up through there.
Why, sure.
And
got
so
a head start.
Got a head start that way. And my mother and daddy taught us our ABCs when we started to school, and they helped us to get our homework. And as years went on,
Which one of the subjects do you like the best?
all of them.
You liked them all.
I liked them all. I liked them all.
Did
I
you
loved
ever
to go to school.
spelling bee?
Oh, yes, sir. And I spelled and been the head one for a long time too.
Mm-hmm.
But school, it was grand. I loved it.
Now, do you remember any of the games you played?
Yeah, I was just thinking. But we had ball games at school. Eventually, when we moved in 1914, we moved to Gilbertsville, and we left the course of school at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had the ball games at school. That is, little boys and girls would hit the ball and knock it out. We just called it a ball game. That is it. And then, when we moved back down on a farm from Gilbertsville, we went to Wilson Ridge School, and we played ball then and choose up sides, and of course us children would play ring around the rosy and drop the handkerchief and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I always enjoyed school, and I can't understand children this day and time not wanting to get their homework. That's the first thing we did when we got home from school. Well, we probably went to work out in the field after we come home and then come in for supper. But after supper, we got our homework. That we did is just like eating. We got that and got it done. I don't remember ever going to bed at night before we had everything done that our teachers told us to do.
Well, you were probably fortunate to have parents that encouraged you to do that.
Yes, they did. They was good parents, and they encouraged us to do our work. But we just enjoyed doing our work, because hard work we had at home. At school, that was easy compared to what we had at home.
I'd almost cry when school was out because
Oh.
I enjoyed school. My mother helped me and encouraged me a lot. Well, my dad did too. And it was so much easier going to school, I thought, than hoeing corn and suckering tobacco and
all of that.
all those things.
It was all hard work.
Yeah.
And there's been some thrills along my life that I want to speak to you about.
Well, of course. Let's hear about it.
One of them was that covered bridge between Calvert City and Benton. Well, do you remember that?
Well, now, I remember a covered bridge that was across Clark's River.
Across Clark's River,
Yeah,
right there. Well, my people, as I told you, my grandfather and mother lived at Benton. And on Saturday morning, when we wanted to visit them, we would borrow a surrey and put 2 horses to that surrey, and we'd take off. Of course, these was all dirt roads at that time. We had no gravel roads or anything of the kind.
Surrey had 2 seats.
It had 2 seats, and my mother and daddy would put us children in there, and we borrowed the buggy from Mr. Rufus Wilkie, our next door neighbor, next farm neighbor. And we would go and to drive through that covered bridge and hear those horses' feet on that bridge.
Clip,
we got
clop,
the big
clip,
clip
clop.
clop. We got the biggest thrill. You know, dirt horses gravel on dirt so you don't make no noise. But when they got in that bridge, and
It just resounded
it
and
just
echoed.
had a big thrill. We was going out and we was hearing them horses, and the streets was brick streets, and those horses' hoofs on that brick street, that was just a big thrill.
Yeah.
And of course we burned wood in the country. We never heard of coal smoke. And then coal smoke in the city, would you believe that was something real interesting,
Mm-hmm.
really a thrill to
Was
smell
a
that smoke.
different experience, and therefore it was
Different experience. It was
fun, too.
enjoyable.
Now, what sort of a place was Gilbertsville when you first
Well,
remembered?
Gilbertsville was a very interesting place.
It was on the railroad, wasn't it?
Yes, it was on the railroad, and there was a viaduct that came. The road came underneath this viaduct, and the place where my daddy sold our farm that we had here in around the river,
Mm-hmm.
and we bought a blacksmith shop and a grist mill, and
So he ran a little business.
he ran a little business. And so my sister and me, we would be in that shop and watching and seeing what all was going on. And the farmers would bring their corn in there to make cornmeal out of. And some of them would bring it in unshucked. And my sister and me would have to shuck that corn. And then my daddy would run it to a sheller and then put it through the mill to grind meal.
Mhm.
And that was a great big gasoline motor that run those rocks that made the cornmeal. And one time that motor caught on fire, and it like to scared me and my sister and my daddy to death.
I should say
And
so.
he run up and grabbed some old sacks and put it over and smothered it down. I don't recall how come, but something got wrong with it. It caught on fire.
Mhm.
But that was a big thrill too, because we got to meet the farmers as they come in and got to watch my daddy shoe the horses and all those kind of things. And then my mother, the reason we went to Gilbertsville was my mother was sick and not able to work on the farm, so she got to where she was able to work on the farm, and we sold the mill then and the blacksmith shop and moved on to a place down here on the old Beaver Dam Slough.
Mhm.
And there we raised tobacco and corn and everything. And we raised sorghum, the first sorghum we'd ever raised. And a man named Mr. John Van Vactor and his boys made our sorghum molasses. And this was about 1915. And my sister and me carried water to the people that made them molasses. But I didn't know I was carrying water to my future husband at that point.
That's the way you met him.
That's one of the ways I met him. He was just a kid and I was just a kid. But I finally met him at the Reelson Ridge School. We had an ice cream supper one night, and us girls someone dipped the ice cream and put it in the saucers, and we carried it to people as they bought it. So my Chester Van Vactor was in a group of boys that played music. So I heard him say, we was carrying out people's ice cream to him, I heard him say, "Boys, let's not play no more, 'cause they won't bring us no ice cream." So I thought, oh Lord, I got to do something about that. So I grabbed me a saucer of ice cream and I took it to him. And so I went on back to my carrying ice cream, and he asked me later, said, "Why didn't you sit down while I ate the ice cream?" I said, "Well, I had ice cream to carry." But he said, "Well, another girl sit down here," and I went talking to her. And I looked around, and sure enough, I had another girl sit down there. So he said, "Well, I want to walk you home tonight." I said, "Okay, but you can go so far. But after that, you'll have to turn around and come back, 'cause my daddy sees me with this boy. He'll kill me and you both." So he said, "Tell me when." So it's been
So then the friendship just
friendship
grew from
grew
that.
then, and we went to dating then in 1919, Christmas Day. He came over on a date, Christmas Day,
And
19.
your dad didn't kill either one of them.
No, he
then?
didn't kill either one of us.
When were you married?
October the 15th, 1921.
Mm-hmm.
And he was 23, and I just liked a few days of being 19. But
Yeah.
we
Did you have any children?
yes, I have 5 children.
Well, tell us a little bit about them.
Well, now after we married, we lived and farmed for about till 1923
You farmed around Gilbertsville?
with my daddy. No, we
Mhm.
farmed around here, around on the river with my
Yeah,
daddy and
okay.
other farmers. And my oldest child was born down here. Dr. Little delivered him. Me and my husband had rented a little place from Mr. and Miss Sid Peel at Lone Valley. And my oldest child, Thomas Irvin Van Vactor, was born in this little house on the Sid Peel farm. And then he was about a year old, and my husband decided that he wanted to go to Louisville. So the first day of January 1924, we went to Louisville on a train and lived there then, and we had 4 daughters that was born at Louisville.
What did he do there? Work for the railroad?
He got a job on the Pennsylvania Railroad, letting the gates down across the streets as the
Yes.
train went through. And he worked there for several years, and eventually he got a job at a casket company, United Casket Company, and he built cabinets I don't mean cabinets, caskets.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually he went to a furniture factory and worked in a furniture factory.
There were a lot of furniture factories in Louisville
Yes,
back
sir,
then.
there were several in Louisville.
Consider H. Willett and Mingle. And I
He
don't know how
works
many
at
more.
Willett's and Mengel's both, and Adler's, and there's quite a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
So then, eventually, whenever World War II started, he quit the private work like that and went to working on defense plants at Charleston, Indiana. And that was money. We'd never had no big money at all. That was great money for people to work on them defense plants, that's carpenter work, building these defense plants. And some men, folks from down here at Calvert City, came up there and they boarded at my house. And I boarded them. I had 5 children at that time, 4 daughters and a son. And we just had a little shotgun house, and how in the world I ever put 4 and 5 men, boarders, and 5 children, my husband and self in that little house, I'll never know.
We didn't have to have as much room then,
Didn't
did
have
we?
to have as much room. But we all had a good time.
Did you ever hear of a pallet?
Oh, yes, sir.
Company would come and you'd make down a pallet.
Yes, sir. Laid down a pallet many times. In fact, as my children, they were in the summertime, we had a door like this, and they'd lay on the pallet at the door because, see, we didn't have no air conditioning, all that, hot
you
weather.
You wanted to breathe.
They slept at the door.
Mm-hmm.
But, yes,
Well, that's good. Are any of your daughters living?
all of my children are still living. My son lives at Grand Rivers, and I have 4 daughters. The oldest one is Earlene, and she married a man by the name of Thomas Bruner, and they live in Clarksville, Indiana. And then our second daughter was Margaret Marie, and she married a man named Herbert Lee Curry, and they live in Louisville. And then my next daughter was Betty Jean, and she married Edward Prophet, and they live in Louisville. And my next daughter is Carolyn Lou, and she married a man by the name of Al Basham, and they live in Louisville.
Isn't there a fellow named Van Vactor that runs a steakhouse over here?
Uh-huh. That's my husband's great nephew.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Darrell Van Vactor, he's my husband's great nephew.
Now, do you have any grandchildren?
12.
Well, I'd say you have some grandchildren.
I have 12.
And they're near enough that they can come see
They're
you.
grandchildren for sure. And I have great-grandchildren also. I can't recall how a number. but I have great-great-grandchildren.
Well, you're
I have three great-great-grandchildren.
yeah.
Three great-great-grandchildren.
Uh-huh. Well, that is fine. You've had a good life and you've
I
enjoyed
certainly
life.
have.
Even though I suppose if you wanted to, you could sit down and say, "Oh, I had a terrible time in life." But
Yes,
could you?
I could. I've had some hard times in my life, but I want to tell you right now, they don't never come to my mind, but oh, the good times comes to my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I think of the good times, and but I don't want to even think about
Do
them.
you remember any funny incidents or any unusual things that you'd like to get on? We only have about 4 more minutes
Oh,
to go.
let's see.
So, what about any old-time medical remedies you didn't like? I bet you didn't like castor oil, did you?
I didn't like it very well, but I took it a lot. I took it and turpentine
Now, what did they give you turpentine for?
for worms.
Mm-hmm.
You put a drop of turpentine, you get about a teaspoonful of sugar, and you put a drop of turpentine for each year old the child was. And you give it that for 3 mornings. And then you give it a big dose of castor oil. That's the way we got treated.
Mhm.
I know it doesn't sound very well, but
It worked.
it worked. That's what had to happen. But yes, it was. I can recall one thing that I'd like to tell you about. My mother and daddy broke young horses whenever they got ready to farm their farms in the spring. And this particular time, they was one of these horses jumped on my mother. She was leading it. She fainted and fell, and this horse hit her right on the chest.
Oh.
And the neighbor men got decided that horse was dangerous, but she was unconscious for about 2 or 3 days and nights. And the neighbor man was thinking this horse had done something terrible. So my mother came to her and she said, "Oh no, don't bother the horse. It wasn't its fault at all." Said, "I'd fainted and fell, and he done everything in the world. In other words, that's all he could do. He had to do that."
You just accidentally
stepped on her. And something funny. You got how much more we got?
Oh, we got a couple more minutes.
Okay. My sister and me, we had a little lot that had hickory saplings in it, and we used to climb them hickory saplings clear to the top, and would make us them backwards and forwards
Ride
like
them
that.
down to the ground?
No, we didn't get them down to the ground, but we swung them. We swung them in the top, and we could see ever so far when we got up on them hickory saplings. They wouldn't break, they would bend. And
Yeah.
and as I said, we had a lot of good things. We didn't have the pleasures like the kids do nowadays, but we enjoyed ourselves.
And you've made it till you're now 84.
I'm 83 years old.
83 years old.
Uh-huh.
And you look good. You look as
I
if you're
feel
ready for at
good.
least a dozen more years.
I left and told my pastor that I was reaching for that 100 mark. He said, "I believe you'll make
A
it."
lot of people are doing that now. And we certainly thank you for letting us come to your home.
I
You have a nice, neat place here.
thank
We've
you.
enjoyed speaking with Miss Gracie Van Vactor, who's a grandmother and a great-grandmother and a great-great-grandmother.
That's right.
And thank you so much. We're leaving the home now in Bryansburg and returning you to our studios in Benton.